On behalf of the House Democratic Caucus, it's an honor to address the members of the press at the conclusion of the 10th week of the legislative session. I've got three specific things that I want to address, and then I'll be happy to open it up to any questions that you all might have. First thing is this. There are, as we come to the end of week 10, there's some good news and still some bad news that I want to address. The first part, I always like to start with the good news, is this. For the parents and teachers, the school folks who have been concerned about things like vouchers, and of course most recently about things like the what we believe to be an ill-conceived Senate Bill 1187, an overall deregulation bill that would have taken teachers and given them a great deal of uncertainty as to their retirement, as to their minimum salary schedules, and then a whole variety of other things that we think may have been bad for public schools. It is good news today as we come to the end of week 10 to announce that Senate Bill 1187 as we know it is dead. We appreciate the Speaker of the House trying to amend it and then eventually laying that bill over in the House A and B committee on Wednesday. I know that it happened not necessarily because the Speaker wanted to do it that way or because the Senate author wanted to do it that way. It happened just the exact same way that the voucher bill or the ESA language died earlier this year. It happened because the people of Oklahoma, the teachers, the parents, the administrators, the folks who really are on the front lines of educating our kids, they mobilized in a way that is rarely seen out here. They mobilized around the ESA language and killed it. Then they turned around and did the exact same thing and took all of their energy and targeted Senate Bill 1187. And because of their efforts, a bipartisan group of legislators on the House Appropriations Committee, Democrats and Republicans, we absolutely opposed the effort. And the Speaker knew that, and to his credit, he laid it over instead of fighting the fight and making it an uglier or more contentious battle. And so what the House Democrats want the people of Oklahoma to know is your voice really is heard. There were two major issues this year, vouchers and a deregulation bill that we believe was bad for public schools, that they put their attention towards. The voters mobilized in a way like never before, and their elected officials listened. And because of that, there's good news to report at the end of week 10. The bad news is basically the same song and dance that we've said for the last several weeks, and that is week 10 is done. We've got 6 or 7 weeks left of the legislative session. The House Appropriations and Budget Committee has met multiple times listening to House bills, and now we've met multiple times to listen to Senate bills, and none of those bills, at the conclusion of this week, none of those bills do anything to address the $1.3 billion shortfall that the state has. We've heard things like maybe they're going to offer up a gasoline tax, or maybe they're going to offer up a tax on cigarettes. We've offered up rolling back and restoring the income tax cut that took effect this January, costing the state $160 million. We've heard they may offer up $400 million worth of additional debt, taking out more bonds, trying to borrow their way out of debt. We've heard they may offer up taxes on haircuts and doctor's visits. All of these things have been kicked around for weeks, but not at one point, not one time have they offered up legislation to say, let's get serious about this, let's vote on it now, and give the people of Oklahoma some confidence that there's leadership in this building willing to openly discuss potential solutions to this devastating $1.3 billion hole. So we're 10 weeks in, and not one bill in the House Appropriations Committee over those 10 weeks has done anything to close that gap, and that's a travesty. It's an absolute travesty. And so we're calling on our legislative leaders and our governor to share with folks. You know, when the Chairman Sears, with whom I'm good friends, when he was asked about it earlier this week, he said, oh, well, we're working on things, but we're not sharing that with anybody in essence. It's just a handful of folks who are focusing on that. Make no mistake about it, the solutions are going to require the votes of House Democrats and House Republicans. And so therefore, we ask the chairman of A and B, the Speaker of the House, the governor, to share those thoughts and comments and those bills with us. Because if they're going to need our votes, we don't want something rolled out in the last 2 or 3 days of session and with a gun pointed to our head and said, you better vote for this or else something else bad will happen. No, we need to all be at the table. It's time to open up the budget process and let all of us have a say in it. We've got ideas that so far seem to be ignored, but we all need to be working together. And right now, the closed-door group that's apparently discussing these things refuses to bring them to the light of day. We think that's unfortunate. Our caucus has said all along that it makes no sense to cut $160 million worth of income taxes in January and then turn around and raise $160 to $180 million in cigarette taxes in March. That's essentially what the governor is asking us to do. If we really needed those dollars to fund a Medicaid plan to help backfill these cuts that are coming, these draconian cuts that are coming because of their fiscal decisions, well, then we could have just not cut the income tax. Before it took effect, it should be noted, the people of Oklahoma need to know that before it took effect last May or last spring, I offered up an amendment. My caucus offered up an amendment to stop the income tax cut that was set to take effect in January. We saw the train getting ready to run off the tracks. We saw the enormous budget holes, and we offered up an amendment that said, let's just put the brakes on this tax cut. Let's not let it take effect. We can discuss tax cuts later when we have better budget times. Every single Republican in the House of Representatives voted no. They said, nope, we want to move forward with it. It should be noted that when that tax cut was on the floor, when Speaker Shannon was Speaker of the House and Representative Hickman was just a chairman in committee, the Speaker of the House at that time, the current Speaker of the House voted against that income tax cut because he knew it was fiscally irresponsible. He stood up and did the right thing with my caucus and said, no, we don't want that income tax cut. But since he's been elected Speaker, he's flip-flopped on that. His position has changed for political purposes, not because of the actual reality of the situation we're in. It's unfortunate that the Speaker would say things that like I'm trying to hold the caucus hostage or trying to hold the caucus back. Because he knows that's not accurate. He and I had a conversation yesterday evening outside the Appropriations and Budget Committee room in which I talked to him about the specific issue of the cigarette tax. And I told him, I said, Mr. Speaker, if all 30 members of my caucus came and voted for it, which would be a very heavy lift because my guys really are concerned about raising taxes on middle-class folks in a way that is a diminishing return. Over time, you're going to have more folks go to tribal smoke shops and go to other parts of other states, especially those on the border, which means we're not going to get the revenue that we necessarily are being promised. I've shared with him, said, even if that's the plan you want to offer up, if all 30 members of my caucus voted for it, that would require 46 members of his 71 members to vote for that cigarette tax increase because it takes 76 votes to accomplish that. He's got, by some estimations, 28 members at least of his caucus who signed Grover Norquist's pledge to never raise taxes. He can do the math. I hope he can do the math. Because if you take 28 from 71, that leaves you with 43 members. That means if 28 members of his caucus will adhere to the promise they made to Grover Norquist, not to their constituents, but to Grover Norquist, that means he's only got 43 members of his caucus that would potentially consider voting for that tax increase. Those 43 plus all of my 30 still don't get him to the 76 it needs to pass a cigarette tax. So for him to come and accuse me of playing political games is really laughable because at the end of the day, the leadership starts in his caucus. Can he promise 51? To pass it? Can he promise 56? Can he even promise 46? I don't believe he can. And so until he can step up and show me the names of the members of his caucus who are willing to raise taxes on middle-class families, then we need to ask him the question first and foremost. You deliver the votes, Mr. Speaker, before you start casting stones at anybody else. Because at the end of the day, we're in this mess not because we haven't raised cigarette taxes by $1.50. We're in this mess because the Speaker, the Governor, and the Pro Tem passed $1 billion worth of income tax cuts, $2 billion worth of tax credits and exemptions, and gave away the largest oil and gas giveaway of any oil-producing state in the nation. We are open to discussing all possible solutions to balancing the budget, which marks a significant difference between our caucus's position and the Speaker's position and the Governor's position. Because you see, what we've said is we want to look at bringing our federal dollars home for Medicaid. We want to look at the gross production tax. We want to look at the income tax, fiscally irresponsible income tax cuts. We want to look at the tax credits and exemptions. We are willing to consider looking at a cigarette tax. We're willing to consider looking at a gasoline tax. We're willing to consider all of those. But you know what the Speaker and their Governor have said? They refuse to touch oil and gas. They refuse to touch the income tax cuts because those special interest groups and their political philosophy apparently mean more to them than the political reality of the $1.3 billion hole. So we have put everything on the table. It's the Speaker and the Governor that have taken things off the table. And you know what they've taken off the table? Happen to be the very things that put us in this hole to begin with. If you're going to look at raising revenue, it is very difficult to find $1.3 billion worth of revenue to raise right now. We are in this mess not because the price of oil is at $40 a barrel. We are in this mess because of $1 billion worth of tax cuts, $2 billion worth of tax credits and exemptions, and the lowest gross production tax of any oil-producing state in the country. It took years to get us here. It's going to take several years to get us out. So our perspective now is this. Yes, we need to find a way to bring some revenue in to try to balance these unbelievably difficult cuts that are coming. But the one-time fixes that are being offered, such as $400 million worth of debt, or looking at sweeping one-time revolving funds. Those will create a huge hole next year, and we'll be right back here. So our perspective is this. Rolling back the income tax cuts or looking at gross production tax issues is not just about filling this year's budget hole. It's to ensure that we don't have a budget hole next year and the year down the road, because that's why we're here. Those cuts put us in this hole, and if we don't fix those things, then we're going to continue to look at budget cuts year after year moving forward. And so our 30,000-foot perspective isn't apparently what the governor and the Republican leadership are looking at, is how do we patch this Band-Aid? How do we patch this thing with a Band-Aid to get us out of here, and so that some members can term limit and not have to worry about it? Our caucus is looking prospectively. We're looking forward. We have members of my caucus who will not be here next year, but they're doing everything they can to make sure that even though they're not, the people that they care about, their constituents, will be cared for. Unfortunately, the proposals being offered up by the term-limited speaker, the term-limited governor, and the term-limited pro tem are simply to fix the budget hole currently and leave a huge gaping hole next year when they're all gone, and that's unfortunate. My caucus has for years said that what we need to do is not cut income taxes, which only help a few folks at the very top, but we need to look at reducing or eliminating the state portion of the grocery sales tax, the sales tax on groceries, because that would help everybody and have a disproportionate benefit to middle class and lower middle class families who really could use those dollars. We've said that for years. Matter of fact, we've offered up grocery tax reductions on the House floor, and almost every Republican in the House voted against it. And so our perspective is this: if we can find a way to put together an overall tax package that maybe looks at restoring some of the income tax cuts, restoring some of the gross production tax giveaways, looking at other things to maybe broaden the tax base and at the same time reduce taxes on groceries for middle class and working class families, absolutely we would consider it. From our perspective on Medicaid, we believe a straight expansion, bringing our federal dollars home, is the way to go. Even in the governor's plan now, when we're looking at maybe raising cigarette taxes or pushing 175,000 pregnant women and children off of Medicaid in order to pay for this kind of stuff, we believe those are not the best solutions to move forward. We are open to discussing them, but at the end of the day, they need to do what Ohio did and other states did, Jan Brewer did in Arizona, and just say, our citizens have already paid our federal tax dollars to Washington. We've already sent our federal tax dollars to Washington. Don't ask us to raise our taxes more to pay for our health care in Oklahoma. Just bring those federal tax dollars home. What would happen if we don't do anything with the current Medicaid system? With hospitals already on the verge of bankruptcy, some having already filed, you're now looking at not only if we do nothing to backfill these potentially 25% cuts to Medicaid providers, hospitals, nursing homes, and doctors and nurses. If we do nothing, not only will more hospitals in rural Oklahoma file for bankruptcy, but now you're looking at doctors, providers in those communities, pediatricians, nursing home providers, whatnot, closing their doors as well. They simply cannot sustain the health care and the quality of health care that they need for our seniors and our children at those provider cuts. And so we've got to find a way to close that gap. Our perspective is you could do that by simply rolling back just this 1/4% income tax cut. Part of this overall plan that's been put together that has 4 moving parts in order to try to fund the Medicaid proposal is to kick 175,000 pregnant women and children off of Medicaid and make them pay for more copays and make them have less coverage. The second part is to try to raise insurance costs, insurance premiums. Third part is to raise a fee on hospitals. And the fourth part is to raise cigarette taxes. Well, principally the cigarette tax increase is basically to backfill for the budget cuts. The other 3 proposals are there to pay for the expansion of Medicaid. Our proposal is this: if you really do care about protecting those budget cuts to healthcare providers, you could just restore the income tax cut that they did in January, and you've got all the money you need to prevent those draconian cuts from affecting seniors and kids. Yesterday afternoon, my friend Representative Jason Nelson took to the well of the House as the floor leader, a member of leadership for the last number of years in the House, and announced that he was going to retire at the end of this legislative session. We were shocked, to be honest with you. Nobody really saw that coming, and I want to offer up my comments to Representative Nelson. While it is obvious to anybody who's paid attention to our legislative relationship on the House floor the last number of years, that Representative Nelson and I see things pretty differently when it comes to public education, vouchers, charter schools, and a variety of other things. But it was always done in a civil way. Representative Nelson is, without a doubt, one of the hardest working members of the legislature. He tirelessly works. People say a lot of times they hit us with the tag, well, this is just a part-time job. I promise you, for people like Representative Nelson, it's not. He did enormous amounts of research and study on issues that he was passionate about and that were of concern to him and some of the interest groups that he cared about. And I want to commend him for that. The House will be diminished by his absence. And while I certainly want to reiterate that Jason and I are friends with different opinions on the issues, on some of the issues that he fought for. At no point was it ever a personal battle, and I wish him the best. I wish him the best for his daughter, Grace, who is recovering from a battle with cancer. My entire caucus respects Representative Nelson, respects his family, respects what he's done, and we wish him the very best in whatever he chooses to do at the end of this legislative session.